hope you enjoyed the video, and I would now like to invite the distinguished dignitaries for tonight, Pastor Carlos Harpolo, our Honorary Secretary of the Sahitya Academy, Mr. K. Srinivasa Rao, Professor Shyama Prasad Ganguly, and Professor Vikas Kumar Singh, and Professor Rishi Sharma. Please join us in the conference.
साहित्य अकादमी और पेरू गणराज्य की ओर से संयुक्त तत्वावधान में प्रकाशित पोयनदाई, जो कि इनका क्लासिक नाटक है, उसके लोकार्पण समारोह में साहित्य अकादमी आप सभी का हृदय से स्वागत करती है। मैं साहित्य अकादमी के सम्मानित सचिव डॉक्टर के श्रीनिवास राव जी से अनुरोध करूंगा कि वे आज के हमारे मुख्य अतिथि महामहिम कार्लोस हार्पोलो, राजदूत पेरू गणराज्य दूतावास का अंगवस्त्रम के साथ अभिनंदन और स्वागत करें। मैं अनुरोध करता हूँ डॉक्टर के श्रीनिवास राव जी से वे महामहिम कार्लोस हार्पोलो जी को साहित्य अकादमी द्वारा प्रकाशित पेरू की ही एक कृति भेंट करके उनका अभिनंदन करें। मैं आज के कार्यक्रम की अध्यक्षता कर रहे स्पेनी हिंदी के प्रख्यात विद्वान और अनुवादक प्रोफेसर श्यामा प्रसाद गांगुली के अभिनंदन और स्वागत के लिए अनुरोध करता हूँ डॉक्टर के श्रीनिवास राव जी। और इस कृति को आप सब तक पहुँचाने में जिनका सबसे बड़ा हाथ रहा है, इस कार्य के अनुवादक आदरणीय विकास कुमार सिंह जी, मैं अनुरोध करता हूँ डॉक्टर के श्रीनिवास राव जी से कि वे उनका अभिनंदन करें, और समीश शर्मा जी जिन्होंने साथ में अनुवाद किया। मैं डॉक्टर के श्रीनिवास राव जी से अनुरोध करता हूँ कि वे शब्दों से आप सभी का स्वागत करें।
His Excellency Mr. Carlos Harpolo, Ambassador of Peru to India, Madam Eva Alvarado Di Polo, all the ambassadors and high commissioners of various countries, Professor Shyama Prasad Ganguly, eminent writer and translator, Mr. Vikas Kumar Singh and Rishi Sharma, translators, officials from Embassy of Peru, and honorable friends of Sahitya Academy, also the Embassy of Peru. I am glad to welcome all of you for this ceremony to release the Spanish-Hindi bilingual edition of Ollantay, jointly published by Sahitya Academy and the Embassy of Peru in India. Friends, the engaging duels between good and evil, love and separation, and innocence and crookedness have been part and parcel of every civilization on earth. Most of the epics in all the countries are the ones which captures these duels, and more often than not, these epics have all these and also carry some sort of message in them. Again, invariably in all of them, one can see the triumphs of good, love and innocence over evil, separation and crookedness. Of course, that in itself a singular message applicable universally. The story of Ollantay, depicted in the play, also showcases the same, and the spirit of all these, including the play of Ollantay, is to provide hope and inspiration to common people who encounter darkness and hopeless situations on a daily basis. One more thing that comes out of the story of Ollantay is that one should march on with life regardless of adversarial circumstances one encounters or any other hardship. If one does that, one is bound to succeed in life despite all that. In fact, all these are universal elements and one can draw parallels and comparisons with all the celebrated literatures of the world. In fact, plays and poetry provide more than ample space to depict and portray all the engagements, triumphs, and travails in full glory. This is our second book involving Spanish language after the works of Cesar Vallejo as trilingual edition in Spanish, Hindi, Bengali languages. And Professor Shyama Prasad Ganguly, who is here with us today, was also part of that project. Sahitya Academy has been striving to connect Indian classics with Spanish language. In fact, we have translated 10 modern Indian classics from 10 different Indian languages to Spanish, and we are awaiting some Spanish publisher to take these up and spread Indian literary heritage in Spain and South African countries. All in all, we are very happy to bring out this edition of Ollantay in all collaboration with the Embassy of Peru in India. Hope we will be able to bring many Spanish classics into various Indian languages with the help of various embassies, because right now we could see many excellencies and high commissioners are present here. We could explore the possibility of more and more Spanish classics to be translated into Indian languages. Once we get it done into Hindi, it can be translated into many other Indian languages. So with these few words, once again I welcome the dignitaries on the dais and on the dais. Thank you all. Now I request His Excellency Mr. Carlos R. Polo, who is the Chief Guest of this evening, the Ambassador of Peru in India, to address this august gathering.
Good evening, everybody, everyone. Dr. Siri Diva Rao, Secretary of the Sahitya Academy, Mr. Kumar Anupan, Professor S.P. Ganguly, Vikas Kumar Singh, and Rishu Sharma, Fellows and dears, Head of Missions, colleagues from Latin America and Caribbean, and members of the diplomatic corps, professors and scholars of Latin American studies and the Spanish language. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's event is the culmination of an effort that started in 2020 with an idea to translate the oldest classic from Peruvian literature, Ollantay, a theater drama set in the times of the Incas, and bring it to the public, in its most widely spoken language, Hindi. The publication of this book, it means to be one of the highlights of the commemoration of our bicentennial of our independence, which coincides with the celebration of the 75 years of India as a free republic. For us, Peruvians, Ollantay is more than a book. It is an institution in its own right and a source of national pride. Children in the school of Peru learn about the epic tale of forbidden love between the brave warrior Ollantay, a commoner and Cuyo, an Inca princess and daughter of the Inca Pachacute. But behind the love story, there is a deeper meaning of conflict between the social classes. The greatness of revelation, the values of loyalty and many other lessons that are as relevant today as they were in the 16th century. Ollantay is a unique mixture of two cultures. When the Spanish arrived to Peru in 1532, they found people who already had a vast cultural production. Historians have found several beautiful poetic compositions made by ancient Peruvians, the Jailis and the Jarawis, which were passed on orally generation after generation. While theater as art form was formally introduced to Peru from Spain, the Incas were already familiar with ceremonies as a spectacle and readily took in the new influence to create something new. As such, the contents of the play are undoubtedly of Inca origin, while its final form followed the European model of theater, like when the theater born in the old Greece. The play is interpreted almost yearly in Cusco during the world-famous Festival of the Sun, the Inti Raymi, with large ensembles of 200 or more actors, all dressed in ancient Inca attire and reciting the verses in the lingua franca of our ancestor, the Quechua language. We are honored to have among us tonight Mr. Barung Anang, and some of the key members of his theater ensemble, Kailaya Play, who in February this year brought Ollantay to life in an online play in collaboration with this embassy at the Cervantes Institute. We have plans to move to a bigger and a more ambitious stage. This effort would not have been possible without the valuable collaboration of many people. I will first like to thank our host tonight, the Sahitya Academy and its secretary for the publishing the book and giving us this space for its release. To our very dear Professor S.P. Ganguly, who has been one of the key figures in bringing Peruvian literature to India, an icon to the newer generation of scholars of Peru and Spanish literature. And in this moment, if you allow me, I would like to pay a tribute to Dr. Ganguly, because who knows him, know that he is one of the most person who knows Latin America, our literature. He's a lover of our writer, and we would like to pay a very, very briefly tribute to him. If you all please join me an applause to him, I will appreciate it. To Professors Dikash Kumar Singh and Rishu Sharma for the incredible effort of translating a very difficult word with nuances that only true scholars of our country can understand. To Mr. Krishna Siruguji for designing the cover of the book. Last but not the least, to Professor Marco Martos, current president of the Peruvian Literature Academy, whose erudite prologue and analysis of the book added immense value to this effort of bringing our country closer to India. Thank to you, to all of you. To end my intervention, I will express once again that I am deeply honored to be here and to share with you the attainment of this milestone in our bilateral relation. In this, my final month of tenure as ambassador of my country, Peru, in this beautiful and incredible country, India, where my dear wife, Eva, and me have to spend more than 3 unforgettable years. Thank you so much one more time. Thank you so much.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद महामहिम राज्यपाल जी। लगभग 4 दशकों की यात्रा करते हुए 4 शताब्दियों की काल यात्रा करते हुए ये कृति अब हिंदी में उपलब्ध है। मैं अपने सहयोगियों से अनुरोध करूंगा कि वे पुस्तक के लोकार्पण के लिए यहाँ पर उपस्थित करें। हमें प्रसन्नता है कि पुस्तक का कांजयी कृति का विभिन्न भारतीय भाषाओं में अनुवाद करने के लिए एक रास्ता खुल गया है जब ये हिंदी में आ गई। इससे पहले विदेश की कई भाषाओं में इस कृति का अनुवाद हो चुका है और अब देश की प्रमुख भाषा हिंदी में इसका अनुवाद साहित्य अकादमी प्रकाशित कर रही है और इसका हमें संतोष है। मैं इस कृति के परीक्षणकर्ता हिस्पानी और हिंदी के प्रख्यात विद्वान प्रोफेसर श्यामा प्रसाद गांगुली जी को अनुरोध करता हूँ कि वे 2 शब्द कहने के लिए आए।
प्रोफेसर को आपने 2 शब्द कहने के लिए कहा, ये बड़ी मुश्किल बात है। My dear friend Anupam had asked me to say a few words, and I said that for a person who has been a professor, a teacher in a university for more than 40 years, just to use a few words is impossible. But let me make an effort. First of all, let me from the core of my heart thank the Peruvian ambassador for initiating this project and also our dear Secretary Dr. Rao of the Academy for collaborating in this issue and bringing the whole project to fruition on this very auspicious occasion of 200 years of Peruvian independence and as well as 75 years of Indian independence, which is called the Amrit Mahotsav. Both coincide, and I am extremely delighted to be present here today and to talk about this work in, let's say, a few words. Well, I could go on for hours on this book, on this experiment, on this experience that we have had in bringing out this book, the kind of exercise it involved for people like us who have been involved in translation activities earlier. But this book was a very special kind of effort which involved the transmission of the literature from the Inca tradition, originally composed in the Quechua language, which was later in the 17th and 18th century, which was transformed into Spanish by the then well-known Spanish priests and administrators. And that this combination, it raises many kinds of issues which a translator has to deal with. while attempting it. The value of this book, from our point of view, are twofold. On the one hand, it is a play, so it is representational in character. We already know that effort has been made in India. Varun Anand has tried to provide a digital version, and we're going to improve it further after all kinds of comments that have been received. And this could also be taken further on a bigger stage, which it needs to be, because so the first value, it is representational value. And we have a whole set of experiences throughout the Western world, in Argentina in 1937 and 39, the first time this play was done by the National Theatre Company with a great success. Then there were many other attempts, and last of all was in 2019, when in Peru, in a place called Ollantaytambo, this was produced with more than 300 participants in a fort, on the platforms of the fort, in a very, very bigger platform. So this is, so the stage is, and all kinds of music, costumes that are being used there, they are available to us for our own reference. So therefore, we should be enriched by all these experiences, the different versions that have been produced by various people in Latin America, in Argentina, in Peru itself, and then translated in various languages, English, French, German, Russian. So it has been translated. So the work has a tremendous importance, and that is why it has been taken over for staging in various countries by different important theatre groups. Now, that representational aspect apart, it has, for people like us who are in studying literature, we are analyzing comparative literature, it has another value. And that value is, as a historical document, it contains so many aspects which any comparatist would love to analyze. I would obviously not go into those details. Let me point out one very important aspect which I have found and reflected on while working with the translators on this project. And that aspect is how work of this kind gives us, a piece of literature that is based on not just, an oral tradition being turned into a written tradition, but see into that tradition the possibility of those, the conquerors, the colonizers, and the colonized, how there is a reflection in a text like this, the combined effort from both the colonizers and the colonized. The text has been, while from the oral tradition, this text was being, obviously it must have been in a verse form, because at that time there was no tradition of theater in the Inca times. But after the Spaniards came, the whole experiment of it was turned into a theatrical framework, and while doing so, and this is the important point, while doing so, the Spanish administrator, priest, who was supposed to be looking after or guarding the interest of the colonizer, so that there is nothing in the text which could go against the colonizer's interest. But such people, and we have names of such people, there is no need for me to go into that, but such people also used the services of mestizos, or people, a helper, an assistant from the Inca tradition, in order to transform this from the oral into a written text. Now, while doing so, such, and we have proof of such helpers, such assistants, somehow maintaining, somehow trying to integrate the whole tradition, Inca tradition, through the oral framework, to maintain some of the cultural values of the Incas and integrate them into a new written work that was being supervised by the Spanish colonizer. And in this, the Spanish, this aspect is important for those who want to go into this text in a comparative manner, in an intellectual analysis of the text. So this has happened not only for this text, in other texts. When I was in Peru, I was gifted a book called Dioses y Hombres del Guarachuy. And there I found the person who is writing the introduction is very conscious of the fact how these assistants, helpers, are through the maintaining the oral tradition, the cultural values of the Inca people. So this effort is very, very evident in this book also. In this translation, while doing the translations, we were looking at how the whole prose work is combined with poetry, and there are names that have been used which come from that tradition. And so these problems of these translations, other colleagues will talk about them. But the very fact that this text becomes a representation of the resistance of the Inca people to the colonizers. So this is nothing new in our analysis. I was reading a book by one of our great political psychology scholars, Ashish Nandi, and he has about 25-30 years ago he wrote a book which became very, very popular, in which he is talking about the you know, the way the self is recovered by the colonized. In a text, how, there are, in British India, there were many Britishers. Of course, Britishers were colonizers, but the Britishers themselves, there were some who tried to defend the interest of the local, of the colonized. Now, so there is this, the recovery of the self evident in these texts. And I found there is a tremendous similarity between these two ideas presented on the one hand by Ashish Nandi and on the other hand what is available in this particular text. Now, that becomes another field of inquiry which such attempts, which such books open to us Indians who go into the analysis of the various aspects, facets that such books make available to us. Now, this idea of the resistance maintained by those who come from the orality. And in this oral representation, one will find that they are very different from the legally permissible writings. Somehow in these oral versions, the writer, the composer introduces elements which only orality can maintain. And the heroic saga in this work, which is very similar to many heroic saga through the oral tradition written in India also. So there is some kind of a parallel between these, the resistance of the colonized culture to be made evident and made available in these writings. In the ways they do this is very, very evident in this writing. I will be very happy if an Indian scholar goes into these aspects apart from the representational aspect. Now, I will not take any more of your time. This is what I thought would be very, very relevant as a result of the production of this book. I am very, very happy that finally we have been able to contribute in bringing out this very important volume on the occasion of the Peruvian bicentenary of independence. And I am extremely thankful and grateful to the Sahitya Academy for having collaborated with the Peruvian Embassy in this project. I am also extremely moved by the presence of so many important personalities here. I really, before closing, I would like to thank you all. Thank you very much.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद मिस्टर श्याम सर। किसी प्रकार की कृति का अनुवाद करना कठिन होता है। उसका एक कारण तो यही कि उसकी भाषा की प्राचीनता, उस भाषा की अपनी कुछ खासियतें, और ये एक ऐसी कृति जिसमें इनका की विशेषताएं, विशेषकर इसके गीतों और छंदों की जो इसे स्थानीय नाट्यकला से जोड़ते हैं, इन सब का अनुवाद करना निश्चित तौर पर बहुत कठिन रहा होगा, बहुत चुनौतीपूर्ण रहा होगा। लेकिन दुनिया की सबसे ज़्यादा बोली जाने वाली चौथी भाषा हिंदी में इस कालजयी कृति को लाने का जो एक गौरव है वो अपने में खास होता है। और ये गौरव हमें दिलाया है आदरणीय विकास कुमार सिंह और ऋषु शर्मा जी ने अपने अनुवाद के माध्यम से। मैं उनसे अनुवाद किए अनुभव जानने के लिए अनुरोध करता हूँ कि वे दोनों उदाहरण और अपने अनुवाद के अनुभव हमसे साझा करें।
Good evening, everyone. It is precisely 250 years after the appearance of the first manuscript of Oyantai. A Hindi translation of this work has now surfaced. 2 centuries and a half is a long time. And indeed, this delay has kept the Hindi speaker deprived of a work so historic. If the literary world is enraged with the delay, its rage is justified. However, there is a strange thing about all literary works. Unlike most of the things in the world, which wither away with time and fade into oblivion, a literary work grows younger and younger with time. Thanks to the never-ending transactional relationships within the societies, new perspectives come up, and old ones evolve to give a new dimension to look at a literary work. In the hiatus of 250 years, in the translation of Oyantai into Hindi, both spaces have now had new experiences, and therefore translating the work now has given us translators tools and perspectives that would have instead been unavailable some 200 to 250 years ago. Peruvian scholar Alfredo Yepes Miranda, in his research paper La Encañada de Ollantay, while praising this literary work, writes, Ollantay is an Inca drama for the pride of the ancient culture of Peru. While the old Hindustani and Greek civilizations show the world the rare and mysterious light in their ancient thought, contained in the immortal pages of Mahabharata and Ramayana, the Iliad and the Odyssey, from the Peru of the Incas, we are enlightened by the brilliance of the art of that civilization in the drama of Ollantay. This play, as Ambassador has already mentioned, is the fruit of pre-Columbian Inca culture, the oldest expression of Quechua literature, with historical allusions to the glory of Inca Empire and its capital. Jose Maria Arguedas, arguably the greatest Peruvian novelist and ethnologist whose writing captured the contrast between the white and Indian cultures, praised this literary work in the following words. In the middle of this ocean of Quechua literature, Ollantay appears as an island, as a solitary monument, not only because of its profane theme, but because the work contains a praise of the Incas. This epic drama was preserved thanks to the strength of the indigenous oral tradition of the Incas, as has just been mentioned by Professor Ganguly, with their musical feasts and their dances, their songs or yarabis. It was later copied by the scholars of Quechua language and literature and adapted in colonial times for staging in according to the Western theatrical convention. Over the years, this has been subject of much research by scholars, historians, poets and linguists. It should be noted here that due to the lack of writing in Inca times, the Quechua literary tradition and culture was reconstructed based on oral histories collected by mestizo chroniclers such as Garcilaso de la Vega in his Comentarios Reales de los Incas in 1609, Felipe Guamán Poma de Ayala in his Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno in 1615, among others. In order to understand and appreciate the presence of theatrical performance in Inca times, it is worth mentioning here that the theatrical performances were deeply rooted in Inca culture, and there were 2 distinct genres of theatre. The Huanca, which was a historical nature in which lives and exploits of monarchs and the great champions of the empire were reconstructed and recounted, and Aranve, in which the themes related to ordinary life were staged. Chronicles such as in Garcilaso de la Vega, in his book, Comentarios Reales de los Incas, writes, I quote, the Amautas, who were the philosophers, were not lacking in skills in composing comedies and tragedies, which on solemn days and feasts they performed before their kings and lords who attended the court. End of quote. This play belongs to the Huanca genre, and its existence has been asserted by the Inca Garcilaso de la Vega and other chroniclers. Here we would like to also highlight the fact that the performance of this play served to preserve the cultural aspects of Inca society in the memory of the indigenous people. We find the historical references of the staging of this play during the rebellion of Tupac Amaru II in 1780 in a village called Tinta near Cusco. The staging of this drama was ordered by rebel Inca Jose Gabriel Condorcani to exacerbate the pride of the native race and stimulate the struggle of the native people against the Spanish colonial power in America. Scholars claim that the anonymity of this work is due to the censorship that was imposed against the Inca culture after the defeat of the rebellion towards the end of the 18th century. By a special order of Charles III, the Spanish colonial power prohibited any Inca theatrical performances, the use of Inca costumes, and even the use of Quechua language, and ordered the destruction of all the existing manuscripts of Ollantay. Later, some performances were organized during the Republic, and in 20th century, there is evidence that this play was adapted for a musical version and the text was arranged according to the requirements of modern theatre. Outside Peru, the play was recomposed by the Argentinian Ricardo Rojas based on a personal interpretation that turned Ollantay into a precursor of American freedom, and in his tragedy titled Un Titán de los Andes in 1939. As for the historical context, there is no mention of dates or years in the work, but given the participation of the Inca king Pachacutec and his son Tupaculcanqui, it could be placed between 1461 and 1471, following the chronology established for the imperial Inca period by the historians. It is difficult to confirm the facts narrated in the work, but they could be real, with some distortions later until they became legend. For this reason, there are several versions of Ollantay, but they all have a common source and the story is of Inca origin. We find the first manuscript of Ollantay in form of a fragment in the Journal Museo del People in 1837, and the oldest manuscript we find, which is preserved now in the convent of Santo Domingo, which is the ancient Inca temple of Oricancha in Cusco. It dates to 1770 and belongs to Antonio Valdez. The 19th century English historian Clement Markham, among many others, they considered him to be its original author. Renowned writer and linguist Jesus Lara, quoting the editor of the newspaper Museo Revito, says, I quote, "It was a work in Quechua language compiled a few years ago by Dr. Antonio Valdez, a priest of Sicuani. However, this assumption was later disproved by the scholars of Quechua language and literature. Others claim that Justo Pato Justiniani was the author, but it was later proven that Justiniani's work was simply to copy the ancient text from the first copy, which is preserved in the National Archive of Peru, and we find another version which was later copied by Justo Apo Inca and preserved in the National Library of Peru. And therefore, the authorship of this text is a mystery, and due to the lack of any documentary record, it leads to several conjectures about his authorship, but the time it was composed and the colonial influence. As for the colonial influence, my fellow translator will elaborate on the impact of colonialism in the text.
We live in a post-colonial world. The ways of negotiating the past have changed fundamentally. Ollantay is a piece of literature that has traversed both pre-colonial and colonial times. In the pre-colonial times, it had a different form, meaning, and purpose. Today, it carries with it the colonial experiences and has changed in terms of form, meaning, and purpose. The colonial scholars documented the pre-colonial work from Eurocentric perspectives to do justice to the work to the best of their abilities. It is a common feeling among the essentialists that these kinds of undertaking by colonial scholars have stripped both pre-colonial literature and art of their true meaning and purpose. However, the sense of loss that many feel strongly is not shared by us translators. Taking Ollantay's example in particular, the scholarly interest of Valdez in pre-colonial art and literature motivated him to prepare the first manuscript in Quechua. While putting it in writing, he appreciated the work with the resources his Eurocentric perspective offered to him. Eurocentric is not a colonial word. What we call Eurocentric today was then a way of understanding, interpreting, and defining the world around. The ills of Eurocentrism, of which we are now aware, were simply the thought process. Therefore, it is certain that with all his good intentions, the first manuscript must have suffered in terms of meaning and content. We do not intend to search. We did not intend to search for and compare the original pre-colonial Oriental with the one documented by Antonio Valdez to skim the Eurocentric element out from it and to get the translation of the so-called original work. We made it a point not to make this translation a project, decolonizing project. The version that we were provided to translate was a post-colonial one, written in Spanish with notable mestizo and indigenous elements. The work itself is an example of continuous negotiation in which the native, Spanish, and mestizo societies have been. It is in no way a pure pre-colonial work that the advocates of essentialism would have wanted it to be. This idea of purity has not bothered us at all. We are a post-colonial society as well, and when Oyantai's manuscript was in preparation, India was fighting her battle to stop Europe from taking her over. Here we are now, a transformed society in every way, with a rich and painful experience of colonialism. For this reason, we see a clear relationship between the original and the translated. This is not like saying that the Peruvian post-colonial experience has been the same as the Indian one. Instead, we recognize the difference of colonial experiences of these two nations. Nevertheless, the tools of the colonizers were universal in different colonized spaces. However, these tools were only able to transform the pre-colonial societies and could never replace them totally. The version of Oyantai, whose translation you will read, is that syncretic version that we are talking about. We have used our rich linguistic heritage as a post-colonial society to our advantage.
So as my colleague has just talked about, he has pointed out that we are not stuck with the idea of pre-colonial. Instead, we recognize the post-colonial syncretic nature of the text. We find that there are several versions of this play, as was pointed out by Professor Ganguly, and it has been translated into several languages. But the version we were given to translate is post-colonial. Although we have consulted other versions of this work, for example, that of Gavino Pacheco Segarra and Clemens Merkham, for this translation we have relied on the first Spanish version by Jose Sebastián Barranca, a notable 19th century Quechua nationalist, which was published in 1868 under the title Ollantay, Drama en Verso Quechua del Tiempo de los Incas. Unlike the other versions in Quechua, Sebastián Barranca's version is of a narrative type. 2 or 3 choruses are also present in the play with the verse structure as a way of expressing the audience's thoughts. For example, a boy's chorus and a girl's chorus quoted the bad omen employing the bird or tuya. We'll talk about the bird tuya later. It is believed that one of the girls' choruses is still sung by Indians on their long journeys or when they're carrying crops from the field. But the central question that we need to deal with here is why we were asked to undertake to translate this play. While India celebrates the 75th year of independence, Peru commemorates 200 years of freedom from Spanish colonialism. The idea of showcasing a masterpiece of Peruvian literature in India, that is Hindi, one of the most important languages of India spoken by roughly 500 million people, on the occasion of bicentenary of Peruvian independence, only brings closer the literature of two nations. It is important to note here that for our Hindu readers, this play not only exposes Inca culture historically, but touches on universal themes of love, religion, politics, war, freedom, and human dignity that continue to this day in literature. We believe that these themes are universally shared by peoples who have been oppressed by the colonial power. Although the drama is triggered by love affair, it unfolds on a political plane. Through the reading of Ollantay, we would cite some of those issues and how we have worked closely in improving the text from the first draft to the fourth by using all the means available to us to overcome those challenges.
In attempting the translation of this play, we realized that we needed not only an intimate understanding of the source language, or let's say languages, because it has Quechua words and expressions, but also the context of the original text and the power relation in the Inca social system. The task of translating this Inca drama, which seems to be tempered by the Spanish priest, possesses a difficult challenge in translating the play into Hindi, as the drama abounds in Quechua phrases and expressions, and the poetry and diction of many of the scenes made our work as translators even more difficult. A dramatic text cannot be translated in the same way as a prose text. It should be noted that a theoretical text cannot be treated only as a purely literary text, as it is impossible to separate the text from the performance due to the dialectical relationship between the two. In a play, the dialogue takes place both in time and space and is always embedded in the extra-linguistic constitution characterized by rhythm, intonation, pattern, tones, etc. Therefore, the written theatrical text cannot be translated in isolation without considering the added criterion of theatricality. For us, being able to capture these additional dimensions was a challenge in translating the present theatrical text. As translators, one of the concerns which was whether to domesticate the text or not, and how to maintain a sense of fidelity.
So, as translators, our strategy has been a kind of docile resistance to domesticate the text, with the idea of taking the reader as far as possible towards the text. And whenever necessary, the foreign identity and the linguistic and cultural differences of the source text have been maintained, thus making the readers realize that they are reading a translation from a foreign culture. Our effort has been to ensure that the meaning is not completely lost when translating into Hindi. We have tried to retain the sense of the original, a sense of fidelity, not only to the form without necessarily tying ourselves to the words. But there is an effort of mediation. On the one hand, we want to move the Hindi reader as far as possible towards the original text, since the text on which we based ourselves is not original either. Our mediation consisted, on the one hand, in maintaining features of the source language, suggesting as far as possible some linguistic and cultural differences in the source language, source text. However, the challenge was to maintain the spontaneity of reading in the target language, that is Hindi, and to achieve the same effect in terms of the receptive process. This back and forth between two experiences was a major challenge for us. Moreover, in this play there are many Quechua names and words through which the character make many puns. Our challenge was how to deal with the Quechua names and words and what conscious choices we made while translating them into Hindi.
We understand that reading a play can be a little flatter than seeing it performed. As translators, we have made conscious choices about which Quechua names and words to retain and which to translate into Hindi. Some choices are detrimental to the text or were detrimental to the text, as the characters make many puns, and this gets lost when translated in another language. In such cases, we have chosen to use the character's name or words in Quechua and have used footnotes to clarify the meaning or explain the pun. For example, one of the characters, Pusikoyud, is called Joyful Star in Quechua. So others refer to her simply as the joy or the star. Likewise, another character, Ruminiaui, is called Ojo de Piedra, stone-eyed in Quechua. So whenever he is around, we find mentions of stone and rocks. For example, in scene 8, Act 2, Ruminiaui says, "Salí con una piedra y con ella he peleado." So I went out with a stone and I have fought. Likewise, the names of other characters make pun in Quechua. In addition, there are references to places Antisuyu, Uru, Pampa, Coyao, Saxa, Uaman, etc. Plants, animals, Tumki, Yama, Puma, some customs, Inti, Raimi, Kipu, Yarabi, Akla, Uwasi, that are Inca. We have chosen to use the original word in Quechua to preserve the original culture, and in some cases we have used footnotes. Let us now see a few more examples how we try to ensure linguistic transfers and also the transfer of the function of linguistic utterances in the target language.
So, like my fellow our translator has just talked about the challenges. Another challenge as translators have been to ensure linguistic transfers from the source language to the target language, not only at the level of discourse significance, but also the transfer of the function of linguistic utterances in relation to other signs of the theatrical discourse, that is auditory and visual. In some cases, we have chosen to reconstruct the dialogues for a Hindi-speaking audience. For example, the long monologues have been split as monologues of such length are not part of Hindi stage conventions. In the play, we have found the use of adjectives. For example, from the very first scene in Oyantai, the adjective palomita, uripilai in Quechua, which means little dove, is used to express a deep feeling for the loved one, a peculiarity of the Inca culture. In translating it into Hindi, we have replaced this adjective with other adjectives in Hindi, according to the Indian context. For example, when Ollanta addresses his beloved by saying, "Siempre de amar a esta tierna paloma," in Hindi, we chose to use the adjective hansni, that is goose, instead of kabutri, dove. Whereas when Inca Pachacute addresses his daughter Pusi Coyor using this adjective, when paloma, I mean pecho, here we opted to use the adjective Meri Pyari Koel, mi querida Pupu. In the same way, when Pusi Coyor addresses her daughter Titusaya by saying, "Ay palomita," there in Hindi we translated it to, "O meri pyari kokila, ay mi querida pupilillo." Oh. For us translators, it was equally challenged how to deal with the cultural nuances of the metaphors, particularly dealing with a foreign text.
Another area of concern has been how to translate metaphors. It is how to deal with the translatability of rhetorical figures of speech. To exemplify how differences in cultural facts can cause difficulties in translating metaphors, we can look at symbolic meanings of certain words in distinct cultures. For example, in scene 2 Act 1, when Ollanta says, "Ese león anda acompañado del mal presagio," that lion is accompanied by bad omen. The element león, that is lion, and mal presagio, that is bad omen, do not, in our opinion, fit together well in their metaphorical nexus. We therefore opted to use the word sax, tipo, type, for leon, lion, when the strictly literal equivalence of some words led to confusing meanings. We resorted to meanings instead of signs. For example, in scene 3 Act 1, when Pikichaki says, "Me había dormido como una piedra," I had fallen asleep like a stone, we have translated it as "मैं घोड़े बेचकर सो गया," instead of saying "मैं पत्थर सा सो गया." Although the latter also seemed acceptable, however, the word patthar, stone, evokes a spirit of grandeur in the Inca context. On the other hand, the use of the word ghode, caballo, horse, gives the correct meaning in Hindi, but in pre-colonial setting, there was no horse. How does the translator balance between the temporal of this nature? There are several such cases. We are only mentioning a few to highlight the problem. We also had to face challenges while translating the native Inca Jaravis songs.
So, to the equivalence, by maintaining the poetic spirit of the original songs, and that was an arduous task for us. As you all know that in Ollantay, the Inca sounds appear in two forms, or rather say two songs, the Tachua and the Yaravi. In this Inca play, we find the Inca sounds in the form of two types of songs. While dealing with this Yaravi song, we would like to share an anecdote of our experience of translating, while we were translating the Yaravis. The word Tuya, as I mentioned earlier, appears in the Yaravis, the sad songs, repeatedly in the original text. Initially, we presumed that Tuya was nothing more than a part of the chorus with no actual meaning and repeatedly appeared in song to give the Yaravi a musical effect. However, while reading Rios Gran Luis by Arguedas one day, I realized Tuya was a bird which has been described in great detail by the author in this book, Rios Profundos, Only then were we able to correct our mistake. Arguedas beautifully describes the Tuya bird and what it means for the people of Peru. He says that the calandrias were singing in the mulberry bushes as if they had been trained. Usually they perched on the highest branches. They were also singing and swinging in the tops of the few weeping willows that grew among the mulberries. The native word for calandria is tuya. In fact, its tiny yellow-black winged body may easily be seen against the sky and the coloring of the tree. The bird flies from one branch to another higher or to another neighboring tree to sing, changing its melody. Its songs transmit the secret of deep valley. From the beginning, the men of Peru have compiled music on hearing it and seeing it wing across space beneath the mountains and the clouds, which in no other part of the world are so extreme. Tuya, Tuya, as I listened to its song. Had we not encountered this critical piece of cultural information in Rios Profundos, we would have messed up the translation of the Yaravis, that is the Inca songs, terribly. So one can see that there are many cultural details disguised in this drama, which at first sight looks like a drama revolving around the themes of valor and love. Despite the hurdles, we have tried to translate this play into one of the most important languages of the world. From the very first draft to the final draft, we feel that there could be areas that we can consider improving, and that is what we believe is the nature of translation. As Alfonso Reyes, the great Mexican writer, once said to Borges, I quote, "We have to publish what we write, because if we don't, trying all the possible variations, we don't stop modifying it and we don't go beyond that." End of quote. In Spanish we say, he said, cito, "Tenemos que publicar lo que escribimos, porque si no lo hacemos, probando todas las posibles variaciones, no paramos de modificarlo y no vamos más allá de eso." The fact is, several revisions have taken place based on the discussions with Professor Ganguly and Sri Anupamji and Neerajji from the editorial team of the Sahitya Akademi regarding the linguistic and the cultural nuances. We have allowed it to be published only when we were fully satisfied. As Walter Benjamin describes in his work, The Task of the Translator, translation is a continuous process and no text is final. We hope that the inevitable variations or deviations that might have appeared in the process of translation will be rectified by those who choose to read this translation with a critical eye in the form of a new and improved version. It gives us immense satisfaction to be able to provide this translation, which we hope will contribute necessary material to strengthen Hispanism in India in general and to the knowledge of Peruvian literature in the vernacular language in particular. We hope that the students of translation and comparative literature will find this as an elementary text to understand the other culture. As a concluding note, we translators would like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Carlos Rafael Polo, Mr. Fabio Surya, Cultural Secretary, for their support to the project. We would also like to thank Dr. Marco Matos, President of the Peruvian National Academy of Letters, for writing the preface, as well as the Ambassador for his introductory remarks for the edition. We would also like to show a deep sense of gratitude towards Professor S.T. Ganguly for writing a reflective piece for this edition, for advising us on the translation and for evaluating the present text. Last but not the least, we would also like to thank especially Dr. Srinivas Rao, Secretary Sahitya Akademi, and his entire editorial team led by Sri Anupam Kumarji for their unending support in bringing out this publication. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद डॉक्टर विकास कुमार सिंह जी और ऋषि शर्मा जी और आप सबके प्रति हृदय से आभार। मैं पुनः धन्यवाद देता हूँ महामहिम कार्लोस आर पोलो जी को, प्रोफेसर श्यामा प्रसाद गांगुली जी को, विकास कुमार सिंह जी को, ऋषि शर्मा जी को और विभिन्न देशों से पधारे हुए महामहिम कार्लों को और आप सबको, आप सभी चरणपान पर आप धन्यवाद।
So much, since I was sick, I want to make sure it's